Good morning, and welcome back to Hobby Time on Gaming with ADHD. I recently received the Mutant Chronicles Siege of the Citadel board game from Modiphius Entertainment. My Kickstarter pledge came with more than 150 highly detailed miniatures. I say highly detailed, but unfortunately, from a distance, they look like gray lumps of plastic. See? Especially when I consider that in most cases, while playing the game, I'm going to be about an arm's length away, and they're still going to look like gray lumps of plastic. So, while I know that I can paint the figures to a level that is acceptable to me, many people don't believe they can, or they just aren't sure where to start. So, today I want to talk about 5 things that you can do to get comfortable enough to try painting your board game figures so that you don't have to suffer with gray plastic blobs as well. So, to start with, just as a disclaimer, this video is not about how to paint your miniatures. This is about things that you need to consider if you're going to take the plunge into this part of the hobby. This video is aimed at the absolute beginner, but hopefully it inspires you to take the plunge into painting your board game miniatures regardless of your skill level. So first, I recommend that you set your expectations. What is it that you consider painted? What level of detail do you expect to get? I say this because there are different ways that you can paint. You can paint for full color, make it look like the art out of the books. I want to do a video on what I call, or what was taught to me as cell shading. Basically a way to do a very simple paint job that will just let you see the detail on the figures. And I'll show you some examples of that later on. But also, expectations and goals are similar, but they're not necessarily the same. To me, goals are where you want to end up, while expectations are sort of a standard to which you're willing to accept. Maybe it's not as good as you would like it to be, but it's a level to which you're willing to stop. You'd also want to consider, do you want to get to the level where you could enter your models into a competition? Or do you just want to improve the look of your game so that you no longer have those lumps of gray plastic? So that's the first tip. Set your expectations. The next tip is where to start. First off, with your game, don't start with the giant dragon or the mighty hero. Those are centerpiece models, and they can wait until you get some practice. Let's take a look on the table. So I've got some examples here. This is the Algaroth miniature from Siege of the Citadel. So this is what I think of when I talk about the giant dragon, the mighty hero. That centerpiece model that you might want to look better than just an average minion. But Siege of the Citadel does come with a dozen of these Legionnaires. They're pretty basic. They've got a gun, some equipment, but I've got 12 of them. And let's be honest, they're the little guys in the bunch. Nobody's going to care if they're not the best looking models on the table. Okay? So, I always recommend start with the minions. Start with the little models that you get lots of. So that way, if one kind of looks out of place, you can leave that one towards the back and maybe he doesn't see the table as often. Another thing you can do is you can get some other models for cheap and practice on those. These models here come from the Reaper Bones line. Each of these models The pricing starts at about $2.99 US. As you can see, you get great detail, but the best part about them is they're inexpensive. Maybe you're playing in a game of Dungeons and Dragons, or you just want some extra models to fill out your game. These are great ways to add to your miniature collection very inexpensively, and to uh, to to help you practice while you're working your way up. Another option is miniatures from other board games. Maybe it's on clearance. This is from Zombicide Black Plague. Uh, and this is just a simple paint job I did that got to the point where you can see the details on it now. It doesn't look like just a gray blob of plastic. Even on those centerpiece models. As you can see here, just a simple paint job makes it look much more dramatic, shows off a lot of the detail, and makes it much more presentable on the table. Now, if you want, you can always go to a standard like this. I don't think my paint jobs are very good, although many people do have a tendency to compliment me on them. But you can go with a full color paint job, but instead of starting on your centerpiece model, start on the cheap ones. So that's the second tip. Start with models that aren't as important. And find alternatives to help you get some practice while you're trying to get your skills up. Now, the next thing is, what kind of tools are you going to get? Okay. Just like I say to not start with your expensive models or your centerpiece models, I have the same opinion on your tools. There are expensive tools, just like any other hobby, any other craft that you might get into. Okay. But there are also junk tools. Stay away from them as well. Basically, my rule of thumb is, if you would give it to a kindergartner for craft time, it's probably not something that you want to use on your board game miniatures. But just as well, that $50 paintbrush, it may be great, but as a beginner, you may not actually get a lot of use out of it, because you can have a tendency to destroy it. What I use is this set. As you can tell, I already have some out and I have been using them. But I picked this up at Hobby Lobby at the time for $8.99. I get 12 brushes, some of which admittedly I won't use, but at $9 for 12 different brushes, I'm saving a lot of money, and to me, they're good enough. Okay. Whether it's Hobby Lobby or any other craft store in your area, they're going to have sets that are similar. Now, these use a bristle that they call Golden Taklon. I like it. It's stiff enough to hold a point, but again, they're very inexpensive. One I will point out: avoid camel hair. I bought them because they were cheap, and they were absolutely atrocious. They didn't hold a point. They were just a mess to work with. But the best part is, I paid less than $10 for another pack similar to this set here. But when they turned out to not work very well, I went ahead and I tossed them and I had no regrets. Uh, and then alternatively, you can find paintbrushes at like your local game store where you would be buying your board games. But a lot of times I have found that they are going to be more expensive. You may be paying, $10 or more per paintbrush. Now, admittedly, they may be higher quality, but again, you're an absolute beginner. It doesn't hurt to buy paintbrushes that are effectively disposable. Okay. Now, with along the same lines is paint. Okay. At the hobby store, you're going to be finding craft paint. Uh, similar to this right here. Okay, this is Apple Barrel, which I believe you can find at Hobby Lobby. At least that's where I bought it. Now, craft paint does have its uses, but for painting your board game miniatures, it's not really what I would recommend. But there are good hobby level alternatives. One of my personal favorites is the Master Series paint from Reaper Miniatures. Um, they are sold in half-ounce bottles, and uh, they're very inexpensive. You're going to pay about $2 to $3 per bottle of paint. Next, we've got Army Painter. The Army Painter War Paints line. These are really, really good paints. The Master Series paints are my favorite. I think they've got better coverage overall. But the Master Series paints are a bit harder to find in the stores. Army Painter is a bit easier to find. I see that in a lot of different game stores that I've gone to, but not all of them carry it. So, kind of depends on what is in your area. But those are my top two. And then the next one that I would recommend is the Vallejo line. There are two options. There's the model color and the game color lines. Model color is going to be more realistic is how I would want to describe it. But basically, you'll find a lot of colors that are great for World War II Germans or World War II Americans. They're really good colors. I have a lot of them in my collection, but they may not be the colors that you're looking for. But they also do a game color line, which are bright reds, bright yellows, more like you would find for your game lines. Hence the name, game color. Now, all three of these, as you can see, they do come in dropper bottles. I prefer that over paint pots, just because it's easier to measure out how much I need. In addition, it's with paint pots, like I've seen, or like I was put out by Games Workshop, they don't tend to last as long. Some of my paints I've had for years, and I can still open it up and use it no problem. But one other thing I did want to point out with the Vallejo line, you can find this at the hobby store. Like I purchased this at Hobby Lobby. However, generally at Hobby Lobby, they're only going to have about a dozen colors or so. They're not going to have the whole line, but more specialty hobby shops may have more full lines. So some other things to think about. Now, the one other thing that I would point out is priming your models. The Bones line, they talk about not needing primer. In fact, you really want to avoid using spray primer, because I've heard of too many times where the paint doesn't cure properly, so it ends up being very sticky and it can technically ruin your models. But with that, you know, I have no problems using craft paint as a primer layer. Again, very inexpensive. At the time I bought this bottle, $3 for, as you can see, a massive bottle of paint. Uh, or spray paint. Now, a friend of mine who does paint, we'll say professionally, this is what she recommended to me. At some of the game stores, you will find primer that can be up to $20 per can. This, I don't remember the price exactly, but at the time I bought it was less than 10. And it primes very well, very thin, and I've had zero issues using this. So, this I found at O'Reilly Auto Parts here in the United States. And in multiple colors, white, black, gray, etc. So, that's the next step is, make sure that you find tools that are very reasonably priced. They're not hard to find and will absolutely make a difference because you're not spending a ton of money to try something new. The next thing I would recommend is Reaper Miniatures does make a great learn to paint kit and also an advanced kit. You can see it here. For $40, you get 11 different bottles of paint, and you also will get 2 paintbrushes, 3 miniatures, and an instruction booklet about how to paint those 3 miniatures. Now, they're not going to be the greatest paint jobs in the world, but for a beginner, it's going to teach you those basics. It's going to teach you some basic steps on how to work with your models. Now, they also sell the Layer Up kit, which is another 11 paints, 2 more brushes, that are finer in detail, so you can get some better looks out of them, and then 3 more miniatures, and then another instruction booklet on how to use those particular colors. If you've never done this before, I mean, there are plenty of YouTube tutorials, but for an absolute beginner, I highly recommend the Reaper Learn to Paint kits. Now, the final tip that I would make is to practice. There's no time like the present. If you want to do this, you won't be getting anywhere if you don't actually start. Like any other skill, you will get better as you work on it, but you have to start somewhere. So, real quick, let's just go over the 5 tips that I have. Number 1, set your expectations. Figure out what is a level of painting that you would accept so that you can get some better detail on your miniatures and make your games look a little better. Number 2, practice with the inexpensive models. Practice with the minion models that came out of your board game. Don't start with your giant monsters or your hero characters. Start with the stuff that you won't mind hiding in the back. Number 3, don't buy expensive tools. Don't buy expensive paints. Don't buy expensive brushes. Okay? Make sure you're not using the junk stuff, but don't go crazy, spending a lot of money on this when it's something that you're just starting out on. Number 4, don't be afraid to get a Learn to Paint kit. Okay? I like the ones from Reaper. I believe Army Painter has a starter kit as well. Start there and make it easy on you. Don't worry about, picking so many different colors. Just start with the basic kit and go from there. And then finally, practice. Practice, practice, practice. So, I hope you got some good ideas out of this. I hope you, take the plunge, do something to improve the look of your board game. Now, I will be putting out a video talking about how I did the Zombicide miniatures, so that you can see the cell shading technique and how you can get a nice simple paint job. But I hope you got something out of this one. So make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I look forward to talking to you next time. Thanks.